We've tested a lot of smartphones this year, but I just need to be upfront with you. None of them feel as absurd or as over the top as this, Asus's new ROG phone. Then again, it's a phone devoted solely to gaming and streaming, so there is no way it wasn't going to be completely crazy. With prices starting at $900 for the 128GB model, the Asus ROG phone is definitely a big investment, but is it worth it? Well, if you're the kind of person who stresses out over frame rates and CPU temperatures and has been searching for the best gaming smartphone period, I think Asus has you covered. For everyone else, hell no, you shouldn't buy this thing. It's overkill, but in this case, it's delicious overkill.
Gonna get all up in this thing. Oh, I've just started moving my face around. That's not great. So,
the ROG phone wears its gaming pedigree like a badge of honor. Just check this thing out. From these coppery orange stereo speaker grills to the light up logo around back to these air vents, this is every inch a gaming gadget. The whole aesthetic has a lot more in common with expensive gaming laptops than it does any other smartphone. And for some people, myself included, that's just gonna be too much. Then again, the ROG phone is kind of the epitome of too much. That emphasis on overkill starts at a very fundamental level. Unlike the other premium devices we've tested this year, the ROG phone uses a slightly different kind of Snapdragon 845 chipset. These have been chosen because they can hit sustained max clock speeds of 2.96 gigahertz. That's about 200 megahertz more than the standard Snapdragon 845. When paired with the 8 gigabytes of RAM tucked away inside, we're looking at what is more than likely the most powerful Android phone money can buy right now. Having a slightly more powerful octa-core chipset is definitely a good thing here, and the ROG certainly screams as a result. Here's the thing though. I would argue that Asus's clever hardware design and software features are really what make the ROG such a great phone for people who care about games. Let's start with the hardware, and specifically those air vents I mentioned earlier. They're carved into the phone's back, and they provide an exit point for all of the heat being ferried away from those processor cores by the internal cooling system. Now, if you weren't aware, and I realize I might be preaching to the choir here, but if you weren't aware, smartphone chipsets get throttled and run slower when the temperatures inside the phone get too high. And in my experience, this quote-unquote game cool system, and yes, it's really called game cool, did an impressive job helping this Snapdragon run as fast as possible. The ROG phone sides are also pressure sensitive, which is not super novel, but is more interesting than it sounds. If you squeeze those sides at the same time, it'll activate what Asus calls X mode. It's a feature that shuts off apps running in the background to free up memory, fires up that LED lace logo around the back, and gives you options to max out CPU performance and enable in-game anti-aliasing. It doesn't just help the phone run better either. Just check this out. Like I said, this phone is the epitome of too much. Anyway, you can use those pressure-sensitive sides as buttons when you're playing a game too. There are two sensors sitting on the phone's right side just where you'd expect shoulder buttons to go, and if you're playing a game Asus recognizes, those air triggers will actually automatically map to specific on-screen buttons. In Asphalt 9, for instance, those triggers are set to virtually tap the parts of the screen where the drift and the boost buttons are. It's also really easy to change these settings on the fly. I started playing PUBG with the air triggers mapped to crouch and fire, and I honestly think my game has gotten a little better. They're not perfect though, mostly because they're almost impossible to repeatedly tap quickly, so you're probably better off using them to toggle some slightly less important in-game tools. Speaking of those in-game tools, the ROG phone has a lot of them. You'll access most of them via an in-game menu called Game Genie, which, among other things, gives you access to real-time information about the phone's temperature, it lets you block incoming notifications and record macros, and stream. No, for real, with just a couple taps, you can start broadcasting your gameplay complete with your face in an inset to YouTube or Twitch. Now, I'm not a streamer. I have no ambition to be a streamer. I had to try though, and the results were, let's just say I have a long way to go.
Hey, what's up fam? Engadget here, streaming some PUBG. Is this a single floor house? Is this a ranch? Oh, that's nice. All right.
strangely enough, there's one area where Asus seems to have played things safe: the screen. Unlike the new Razer Phone 2, which has a display running at Quad HD, the ROG Phone screen only runs at 2160 by 1080. And while both of these gaming-focused phones have screens that run more smoothly than the standard 60 Hz, the ROG phone's screen refresh rate tops out at 90 Hz compared to the Razer phone's absolutely crazy 120 Hz. A more advanced display would have been nice, but if I were you, I wouldn't worry about Asus losing ground here. The display is still more than enough to keep the high-end games I've been throwing at it looking great. Okay, we've just been through a lot, but here's the big question. What's it actually like to play games on this thing? Well, in short, it's awesome. Smartphones have become remarkably powerful, but the level of performance and the elegance of these software tools make the ROG phone honestly kind of absurd. I got rock-solid frame rates while playing PUBG and Fortnite, and high-speed games like Asphalt 9 looked incredible on this display without a hint of slowdown. Benchmark apps like 3D Mark did push the phone to its graphical limits, but that is sort of the point. In any case, no one actually needs this much smartphone horsepower. That said, if you're really looking for the best mobile gaming experience out there right now, I don't think the ROG will leave you hanging. The ROG phone is impressive enough on its own, but here's the real kicker: it's modular. Back at Computex, we saw Asus show off a handful of, frankly, badass accessories. There's a customized controller built by the people at GameVice and a mobile desktop dock that lets you play PUBG on an ROG phone connected to an external display, a keyboard, and a mouse. The wildest was a twin view dock that gives the ROG phone a second screen and extra battery life, which is supposed to be helpful when you're using the phone to play and stream at the same time. Since I've received the ROG phone, I have been able to test precisely none of these things. Alright, that's not exactly true. Every single ROG phone comes with one of these. The company calls it the Aero Active Cooler, which is basically just marketing speak for a fan that draws power from the phone's second USB-C port on its side. It's a clever addition, but I'm not sure it really helps keep things cooler than the phone's built-in air vents did. While playing games like PUBG, I routinely saw CPU temperatures hit between 37 and 38 degrees Celsius, and those numbers didn't really change after I attached the Aero Cooler. Turns out it's meant more to help dissipate heat while you're playing a game and charging the phone at the same time, and in that respect, it really does help. Here's my issue with this accessory port design though. To plug any of the accessories in the first place, you have to dig a tiny rubber cap out of it. And I don't care who you are, this is probably going to get lost at some point. I'm not worried about the second side-mounted USB-C port, but I am a little concerned about what the right amount of pocket lint is going to do to this specialized 48-pin connector next to it. Asus clearly cares enough about this thing to cover it up in the first place. Would a little bit of rubber to connect this thing to the phone really have been that much trouble? Ultimately, and in spite of myself, I have kind of fallen in love with this device. It is a device that, in my day-to-day life, makes no sense. And I think for a lot of you watching out there, the same probably applies to you. It's just absurd. The level of performance, the specific tools it brings to the table, it's only going to mean something to a tiny, tiny fraction of you. That said, I'm pretty sure that tiny fraction of you is going to be very pleased. This costs $900 on the low end, so you're going to be buying into something for a while. But I don't think you're going to find a better smartphone gaming experience on the market right now. Razer Phone 2, super into it, really appreciate what they're doing, but I think Asus's intuitive and elegant software features, especially with respect to in-game tweaks and streaming, set it apart from the competition in a huge way.